different morning, sort of. I was just kind of laughing the whole way at God's sense of humor. Today's message has something to do with our weaknesses and our shortcomings, and we had plenty of that this morning, so it was kind of interesting. A lot of unexpected things that had happened, but you did really good job, praise team. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, Laura's really good about getting the praise team ready, and this morning is kind of really what happened. I see that as God's sense of humor to help us to understand about our shortcomings and our weaknesses. So let's open up our Bibles to the book of Judges, which is in the Old Testament. By now, I hope you know. I'm so used to telling the little kids. I had to, when I used to do children's ministry, I had to tell the little kids where it was, whether it was in the New Testament or the Old Testament. Otherwise, I would have to visually show them, like, yeah, it's about here in the book. Yeah, hopefully that's not the case with you guys. But anyways, Judges, book of Judges. Chapter 16, verses 15 to 17. Okay, if you're all there, can we read it all in one voice, please? You guys are all there? All there? Yes? Okay, all right. Let's read the word of God. And she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words, and day after day, and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart, and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. So, I've served in youth, college, and young adult ministries for a long time. So I was youth pastor for about 9 years, or 7 years, 7, 8 years, and then I had the opportunity to minister to little kids, children aged from 3 to 11, just like I told you just now, and it was sort of getting back to the basics for me, because I got to explore all these Bible passages, Bible stories that I used to read as a child. You remember Noah's Ark, David and Goliath, and Moses parting the Red Sea. You guys all familiar with this stuff, right? And the mighty Samson that we just read about. And as I retold these events, I realized that children saw how great and mighty God is through the obedience of these great heroes of the old. And think about it. I mean, Moses parting the Red Sea, that just shows the magnitude of the power of God, right? But as I dove a little deeper into studying these people from the Bible, from the history, I realized that these people, these great heroes of old, actually all had uncontrollable weaknesses or in their lives. So some of the things that were beyond their control. For instance, Noah had to endure mockery. I mean, Noah had to endure humiliation and embarrassment for years. He didn't build an ark like in a year. That wasn't the goal. It was years when it was sunny and nice, and people used to make fun of him, say, the foolish Noah, he's building an ark in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a mountain for that reason, saying that the flood will come. So he was sort of joke of the town this whole time. And let's see, who else did we talk about? And David, poor David. Not you, David, but David David was a great king, but he also was always threatened for his life, either from King Saul. You see King Saul throwing a javelin at David there, not only once, but I think 3 times, if I remember correctly. and then when he finally became king, one of his sons tries to kill him, and he twice he was forced into hiding with his followers in caves and in wilderness. So his life was not that easy at all. Those are beyond his control. And then who else did we talk about? We also talked about Moses, the great leader. Well, Moses had a speaking problem. We assume that he stuttered because he, repeatedly mentions how he's sort of tongue-tied. And so, he wasn't a great speaker. He was a great leader, but he wasn't a great speaker, so that's why he had Aaron to help him out. And also, in the wilderness, when he led the Israelites for 40 years, they were full of complaints. And who do you think they went to the complaint with? Moses. So it was for 40 years of his life, the Israelites were a thorn on his side. Like, it's a constant, you can't really run away from them because you live with them. So 40 years he suffered these people who constantly did not know how to be satisfied. But Samson, here's Samson. Samson now was a man who was known for his super strength. And I love this picture. It's so dramatic. Shows what kind of strength he was given. He could tear apart a lion with his bare hands. I mean, who could do that? No one but Samson. So whenever I picture in my mind, it's just for laughs, okay? I see a macho man with bulky muscles. He's just big and flowing locks because he could never cut his hair. And just, if you can just picture Arnold Schwarzenegger in his Conan days, if you're like an old timer like me, that's sort of what that's the picture I get whenever I picture Samson in my mind. Because, that was just for laughs. So what could a man like Samson, what could his weakness? Seriously. Samson, but when we look into Samson's life, we could see that his strength ultimately became his weakness. His greatest strength became his greatest weakness. And Michael, if you could actually revert back, so thank you, because it's kind of funny to look at Arnold Schwarzenegger the whole time while I'm preaching. So let's look at Samson's life. Samson's life was far from normal. So when he was born, his birth was foretold by an angel. An angel appeared before his mother and his father, and this is what the angel prophesied. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. The razor shall come upon his head. For the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. If you guys think about it, does it sound a little familiar? Yes. It's the manner in which Samson's life was foretold is similar to Jesus's. Jesus, somebody who was born to be a savior, and here Samson, the angel says, is going to be born to save Israel. So it's an amazing experience, and especially for the parents of Samson, because his mother, they couldn't have children. His mother was barren, so it was a miracle baby for them in itself. But also much more amazing because here an angel tells them, your son is going to save Israel. You see, Israel was under the rule of Philistines at the time, so they were under oppression from them. And, he was to be a Nazarite, which means that he was to be consecrated for God's word. He was specially chosen for the task, gifted with the mighty strength to bring God's judgment against the Philistines. You see, so what they do is parents go to God and offer sacrifice, worship. They worship and ask for specific instructions on how to raise such a child. And God says, okay, when till you give birth, you can't drink anything. Do not put anything that's intoxicating on your lips. And He gave all these instructions, especially about the hair. And that's why I always emphasize the flowing locks on Samson's head. And of course, the parents obeyed. And not much about his youth or teens, when it was little, not much is known, because the Bible jumps right up to when he's old enough to marry. And so Samson, on his way to meet his bride, because he saw this woman, and he wanted to marry a Philistine, not an Israelite. And it displeased his parents greatly. It's kind of like, for you, most of us are Koreans here, so most of our parents want to marry another, a Korean person, not someone of other race. So it's kind of like say, if I brought a Caucasian man and say, I want to marry this guy, your parents' response will be, could we pick a Korean first? You know, and that's that kind of feeling. But the Bible says that there was God's will in this also, and we'll see how. And on his way to meet the bride, he encounters a lion, a mighty lion alone, and he tears it apart to death. And this was God-given strength. Judges 14:6 says, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hands, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. So nobody knew about this incident except Samson himself. And, you know, after this amazing event, his life is even, you know, filled with more unimaginable circumstances. And, you know, we're not going to go into all of it because it really makes it a long sermon, and we don't want to do that. But I'll tell you a little bit summary of what happened in his life. He ends up killing 30 men out of his anger because apparently 30 guests at his sort of engagement party cheat on him on a bet that he waged. So, you know, he comes up with this riddle, and he makes a bet and says, if you figure this out, I'll give you I'll give you clothes, and if you get this wrong, you give me clothes. And the 30 men sort of pressured his wife to find out what the answers to the riddle was, and he became very angry, so he goes out and kills 30 men. And not only that, I mean, if this wasn't enough, he kind of leaves his wife behind to go back to his parents, and his wife is given to another man because people sort of assumed, hey, Samson left his wife behind, so we'll just give her to his best man. Oh, the drama, jeez, right? And then Samson comes back and finds this out, and of course he's angry. My wife is given to another man, so what does he do? He goes out and burns down the grains and the orchards of the Philistines, because he's so angry that his wife was given away, and he does these terrible things. And from here on, it's a story of revenge. It goes back and forth. So the Philistines, because they were the oppressors, the rulers of Israel at the time, they set up camp and raid this place called Lehi, and 3,000, not Philistines, 3,000 frightened Israelites approached Samson because they're really afraid of what the Philistines are going to do to them. So 3,000 Israelites approached Samson. They asked him, what did you do to bring this upon us? Okay, and why don't you do this for us? We're going to bind you. Okay, we're going to have you bound. We're going to deliver you to the Philistines. And Samson, he complies. Why? Because he had confidence in his strength. So, and when he's delivered to the Philistines, this is straight out of the Bible, the robe, because God was with him, the robe melted off his hands. So cool. Now free, what he does is he finds donkey's jawbone, a donkey's jawbone, and he picks that up and he kills 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone. Nothing but a donkey's jawbone. With this unbelievable victory, no one could argue that he was God's elect judge, and he oversaw Israel for 20 years. And Samson's life could have, ended peacefully or there, but this was not what God had in mind for Samson. So what he does this thing where he really likes women, but that's not the weakness I want to talk about today. So what he does is he falls in love with another woman named Delilah. Does the name sound familiar? Delilah, Samson and Delilah. So not much is really known about her, but we know for her actions which ultimately brings Samson's demise. Right? Delilah was enticed by the lords of the Philistines with 1,100 silvers. So what she does is she goes to Samson over and over again, and she uses her charms and wits to find the secret to his power, his mighty power. And Samson, he's a confident guy. So what he does is he tells her these lies, like these false answers each time. So so what he enjoys is, so if these Philistines will come and try to do the things that Samson said was his weakness. Okay, but he easily thwarts his attempts at his life. So, and he kind of enjoys it. You can tell this guy's enjoying it. But here's the thing. Like in the passage that we read today, Samson finally gives the answer to the secret to his power, because he was annoyed. That's what vexed means. He was annoyed to death. His soul was annoyed to death by Delilah. Literally, because what happens is his head is shaved in his sleep and is captured. And he's, because his strength had left him, he's captured. There's not much he could do. So he's displayed as an entertainment for 3,000 Philistines. The judge of God, who was supposed to be the punisher for the Philistines, that became their entertainment, a mockery. Samson's life seems like a simple moral lesson in how not to live as a Christian, right? And in a way, it is. Samson was a proud man. He was very proud of his super strength, and who wouldn't be? And he also knew that no one could win against him. He feared no one. Not even his oppressors. You could see the front Israelites approaching Samson. But he feared no one because of his strength. The Philistines were not a threat to him. He could rely on his strength to bring victory to any enemy he faces. In a capitalistic society like ours today, he's actually kind of a role model. I kind of, as I was reading this, I was like, hey, he's kind of like Steve Jobs, if you think about it. He really, Steve Jobs had a great strength. I mean, it was an intellectual strength in this case. He was, but Samson had this mighty physical strength that no one could win against. And same thing with Steve Jobs. No one could beat Apple. Samsung tried. Funny, Samsung and Samson. But anyways, Samsung tried, but no one could beat Apple while Steve Jobs was alive. And same thing with Samson. So, he would have been a great role model for today's society. But that's not what God's trying to tell us through the life of Samson. He's trying to tell us something else. Because he was so confident in his own strength, he released the secret. Which became his death trap. Did you know what is the secret to his strength? God said, do not let a razor come to your head. So when he spilled a secret to Delilah, what he did was he disobeyed God directly to God's command for Samson to live as a Nazarite, a consecrated person for God's work. He disobeyed God directly because he has so much confidence in his own strength, right? So what he ultimately did was this. He released his heart, he released his soul to his enemy rather than to God. Judges 16:16, and this is passage we read today. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, the Bible just didn't say secret. In fact, it says heart. It wasn't just a secret to his power. He basically gave away. His calling as a Nazarite, a consecrated, a person who's set apart to be God's. He gave that right away. Reliant on his own strength, he completely abandons on God. So, once captured, what happens to Samson is kind of heartbreaking. He quickly crumbles and diminishes. His eyes were gouged out. His proud strength had vanished. He was just a normal man now. He was just like any other one of us. He wasn't the Superman anymore. In fact, he was humiliated as a freak show, sort of, for the Philistines' dinner entertainment. So, if you guys ever know what dinner show is, it's as people eat dinner, they watch some kind of entertainment. That's what Samson had become. He truly lost it all. I mean, think about it. It was the end for him. There was no more hope. However, God always has a plan of redemption for those who seek Him. The Philistines had situated him between the two pillars that sustained the entire house, praising their God, Dagon or Dagon, for this miraculous capture, and there for the 3,000 men to see, or 3,000 men and women to see. And this is what Samson does. So he's basically put on this great stage for people to see, because a man of God had been captured, and so they were praising their idols, saying their God is not real. And this is what Samson does. Judges 16:28. Then Samson called to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once. O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for our 2 eyes." And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned on his weight against them, his right hand on one, his left hand on the other. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. So Samson's, guys, think about it, birth was foretold in a similar manner to Jesus. And he also died a similar death to Jesus. He died for the sake of others. Some people argue that, he committed a glorified suicide. I see it differently. I believe Samson truly was penitent, and I believe Samson did this to save his people, because he was the judge. He was the ruler. He was the leader for the Israelites. The truth is, we all have shortcomings and weaknesses, right? Just like, we saw this morning. And in Samson's final moments, he was literally weak. There was nothing he could do to overcome the situation. He was bound. He was blinded. He was physically weakened. And in those moments, Samson sought God, because there's really nothing that he could do. Through penitent and desperate prayer, when Samson sought God, he was in unison with God's will, resulting in the perfect manifestation of God's power. Did you guys notice how it says at the end of verse 30, "So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life." Now we're not competing for the numbers of, Samson wasn't competing. I killed the most people. No, God's not competing. That's not what God is saying. But when Samson didn't rely on his own strength, but when he was so weakened by his literal weakness, when he sought God, God brought perfect manifestation of his power, and the punishment that was brought upon the Philistines was much greater than the punishment he had carried out on his own in his personal anger. 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9. "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Apostle Paul wrote this to the believers at the church in Corinth. He had certain weakness, physical weakness, and he could not overcome it on his own, so he pleaded to God to take away this weakness. Because if you guys think about it, he traveled extensively, and if you hit the enter next down there one more time, I think the words will appear. Michael. But anyways, that's not important. So, and Apostle Paul had certain weakness, and he traveled extensively, and he had to minister to a lot of people. But this weakness, was definitely, he says, it was a thorn in my flesh. So he pleaded with the Lord to take it away, but God didn't. Do you guys have that kind of weakness? I do. I mean, I certainly do. And although I can't share it with you now, it's a great thorn in my flesh. It is, I pleaded with God so many times, saying, God, I could do so much more for your ministry if you solve this for me. But God still hasn't done that. I think it was the same thing with Paul. But finally, Paul submits to God and realizes this. When God tells him, my grace is sufficient for you. It's not for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. For Samson, he had great strength, and God still worked. God still worked through Samson when he was mighty strong. God still brought punishment upon the Philistines, right? But it wasn't perfect. And when he finally was made weak, and could only rely on God, that's when God's perfect manifestation of His power came through. Life is difficult for Christians for a reason, right? I know many faithful believers that have, they don't have an easy life. They all have struggles and weaknesses and hardships. Many faithful believers. Let me close with a sharing of a story of my youth pastor. That was a while ago. My pastor, growing up, I had like 3-4 different pastors growing up here at Peace, and one of the pastors, his name was Daniel Dogu Lee. Idongu, I think it was Chandosalim at the time. But anyways, so he was my youth pastor, and he was a character, and we made a lot of fun of him when he was here because he loved to eat. Like he would, if I was, I'm a slow eater, so I'm always the last to finish my food. And if I was working on my plate, I could feel a certain stare coming my way if I look. Pastor Daniel's like staring at me, and he's like, "Are you gonna finish that?" And he goes, "If you're not, I'll eat it." He did that with every kid. And so he was a little overweight, like he was a big guy, and he was also a great praise leader, so if he played his guitar would be like up here, because he had that big stomach, so the guitar would be lifted up here, and he would play guitar like this. So we made fun of him all the time, but we learned a lot from him as well. And after he left, we lost touch for a long time, and then recently, thanks to Facebook, we got back in touch again. He had become a missionary in Japan, and he's now a missionary in China. So, so he threw out his years as a missionary. He couldn't acquire any kind of wealth. What he does is we have a little Facebook chat now, and he shares his daily meditations. It's not just me, but his disciples and his Chipsa names, all these. We have this little chat room. He shares his daily meditations, and he shared this with us, and he said, my family is still struggling because we don't own anything. They don't own a home. They don't even own a car. So there's nothing that they